Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Unit 6 on Heroes, Villains, and Tricksters. We only have 2 more units left after this, Unit 7 and Unit 8. I hope everyone enjoyed their spring break and enjoyed the first half of the semester as well as Unit 5. Today we're going to be moving on to talk about Heroes, Villains, and Tricksters and the roles that they play in world mythology. When we talk about heroes, the first name that should come to mind is Joseph Campbell. Possibly no one has done more about the concept of the hero than Joseph Campbell, by far the most popular mythologist of the 20th century, because he'd been on television, a 6-part series called The Power of Myth. Campbell was influenced by the psychological school and Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, but tended to see mythology as the vehicle through which the individual, or the hero, finds a sense of identity and place in the world. In his view, there was a basic monomyth which organized all mythological narratives. In this monomyth, the hero underwent specific steps in a journey of discovery. Specifically, this monomyth involved a hero that went on an adventure, leaving their ordinary world, called separation, entering into a special or supernatural world, going through a series of quests, fighting monsters, etc. This was called the initiation. And then the hero would come home changed or transformed. This is called the return. Along the way, the hero would often receive help from an individual that Joseph Campbell called the mystagogue, the individual who sets the hero out on their journey, who provides them with assistance of some kind, usually tools, weapons, or sacred knowledge. Now, Joseph Campbell didn't think that the monomyth was relegated only to myths and world mythology, but thought that it could be reflected in human cultures as well, through rites of passage. Rites of passage, spelled R-I-T-E-S, are ceremonies or events marking an important stage in someone's life: birth, puberty, marriage, and death. Joseph Campbell felt that these rites of passage were cultural manifestations of the monomyth, with the stages of separation, initiation, and return, and a helper or mystagogue of some kind. Joseph Campbell referred to this idea as a living mythology, the idea that the concept of the hero's journey could change individual people in the real world, and not just in myths. So what are some examples of some mystagogues, or helpers to the hero? Well, if we look at world mythology, we can look at Greek mythology, where Athena, the goddess of wisdom and defensive warfare, often acted as the helper to a number of different heroes, including Perseus in his quest to defeat the Medusa. She was a helper to Odysseus in his quest to return home, and she was a helper to Hercules in his 12 labors. Additionally, we see other examples of mystagogues as well, both in mythology and popular culture. In the Navajo myth of the Sons of the Sun, Spider-Woman, who could take on the form of both a woman and a spider, helped the Sons of the Sun on their journey, their quest. We see examples of the mystagogue in popular culture as well. Obi-Wan Kenobi to Luke Skywalker in the Star Wars series, Dumbledore to Harry Potter, Haymitch to Katniss Everdeen, and Gandalf to both Bilbo and Frodo in the Lord of the Rings series. Rites of passage, or living manifestations of the monomyth, are also common in world cultures. While these signify important events such as birth, death, marriage, etc., most of them seem to be focused around passages into adulthood. These include examples from Jewish culture, such as the bar or bat mitzvah. In ancient Egyptian cultures, the journey into adulthood was through a circumcision rite, through the ritual of circumcision. Among many Native American cultures, especially in the plains regions, a vision quest or a journey to find one's spirit animal was a common rite of passage. Other examples include the Genpuku of medieval Japan, and the scarification ritual of the Saphic River people of Papua New Guinea in Oceania. This is the area, the island chain of the Pacific. Now, what I would like you guys to do now is take a pause from this video and view the following videos on YouTube, each describing a rite of passage. The first is a men's rite of passage from the Sepik River people of Papua New Guinea, which involves the scarification that I mentioned before. And the second is a girls' rite of passage from the Mescalero Apache Native American tribe. I would then like you to answer the questions posted under Unit 6 on Blackboard. These questions are, what do these rituals have in common? How are they similar and how are they different? And question 2 is, how do they relate to the concept of Joseph Campbell's monomyth and to mythology in general? For example, are there connections to ancestor worship or gods and goddesses or mythological creation stories in these rites of passage? Does each person undergoing this initiation have a helper to help them along the way, a mystagogue, if you will? So these are the 2 questions I would like you to answer now. Please take a moment to do that and then return back to the video lecture at your earliest convenience. Thank you. All set? Well then, excellent. I would like to move on to our next section, which is going to talk about different types of heroes. Joseph Campbell, in his book A Hero with a Thousand Faces, talked about 5 general types of heroes. The tragic hero, whose story ends in or is based in tragedy. The romantic hero, who goes on their hero's journey or monomyth for love. The epic hero or wanderer, who wanders from place to place as part of their monomyth. The monster tamer, a hero who defeats monsters as part of their monomyth. And the culture hero, a hero who founds civilizations, states, and cities, or who provides a people with their culture and the tools they need to survive. Each of these heroes may be very different, but all undergo the different stages of the monomyth. While there are a total of 17 stages in the hero's journey, according to the Hero with a Thousand Faces, this can be broken down into 3 basic steps: the departure or separation, the initiation, and the return. So what are some examples of some tragic heroes? One example found in Greek mythology is the story of Icarus. Icarus was the son of the inventor Daedalus. The 2 of them wanted to escape from their imprisonment on the island of Crete, and so Daedalus, who was a great inventor, created wings out of feathers and wax. However, despite his father's warnings, Icarus flew too close to the sun on these wings of wax. The wax melted, and Icarus plummeted to the ground and died. Perhaps the greatest example of a tragic hero is the story of Oedipus. Oedipus was a man who, when he was born, there was a prophecy that he would kill his father and marry his mother. So his father, trying to prevent this, tried to have him killed. However, rather than being killed, he was adopted by a faraway couple. And when he went on a journey later in life, encountered a man at a crossroads, got into an argument with him, and killed him. Little did he know that this was his father. Oedipus then journeyed to the city of Thebes, which he saved from an evil creature known as the Sphinx by solving the Sphinx's riddle. And he was rewarded by marrying the newly widowed Queen Jocasta. Many years later, after the 2 had many children together, the truth was revealed, and in disgust and shame, Oedipus tore his own eyes out, becoming a blind beggar for the rest of his life. Definitely a tragic story. Other examples include Patroclus from the Iliad, or Cassandra, also from the Iliad. Well, what about the romantic hero? There are plenty of examples of the romantic hero from Greek mythology and elsewhere. Paris and Helen of Troy from the Trojan War stories. The story of Orpheus and Eurydice, which we talked about in Unit 5. Or the story of Cupid and Psyche, how the woman Psyche, this heroine, went on a series of journeys to prove herself worthy of being the wife of the god Cupid. Now, the wanderer, there are plenty of examples of the wanderer from throughout world mythology. These include Odysseus, who traveled for 10 years in search of his homeland. The Buddha, who wandered for years and years and years in search of enlightenment. Aeneas, who also survived the Trojan War and eventually would go on to find a home in Italy and found Roman culture. and Moses, who wandered the desert for 40 years in search of a homeland for his people. All of these would be examples of epic heroes or wanderers. The monster tamer is also relatively easy to recognize. These include Perseus destroying the Medusa, Heracles defeating the Hydra, Gilgamesh defeating the Bull of Heaven in the Epic of Gilgamesh, or Beowulf defeating Grendel in Anglo-Saxon mythology. The culture hero is yet another hero that we've already seen. We saw an example of this in Unit 3 with the goddess White Buffalo Calf Woman, who was the founder of the Lakota Sioux culture and gave them all of the things that they needed to survive, as well as many of their cultural elements. Aeneas, who I just talked about in the Wanderer section, is another example. He literally carried his father and his father's household gods from the ruined city of Troy to Italy. Eventually, his descendants, Romulus and Remus, would become the founders of the city of Rome. So we've talked about different types of heroes. Let's talk about some different aspects of the hero's journey that were explored by the ancient Greeks. Much of what we learned about mythology came from the ancient Greeks. They were among the first people to really explore mythology and how mythology worked. Therefore, it's not surprising that a lot of terms regarding the mythology of ancient heroes came from the Greeks. Here are just a few Greek terms which you should know about. Hamartia is the hero's tragic flaw, whatever it is that makes the hero vulnerable. A great example of this is Achilles' heel. Achilles, from the stories of the Trojan War by Homer, was an invulnerable hero. He could not be killed because he had been dipped in the river Styx. However, when his mother dipped him in the river Styx, she held him by his heel, making it the only vulnerable part in his body. Eventually, he was killed by being shot by a poisoned arrow in his heel by Paris during the Trojan War. Remember that hamartias also do not have to be physical, such as Achilles' heel or kryptonite to Superman. They can also be aspects of the hero's personality, whether it is Gilgamesh's hubris or Oedipus's temper. These are the flaws that make the hero vulnerable and relatable. Another Greek term is anagnorisis. Please note, I will not ask you to spell any of these on the upcoming final. Anagnorisis is the Greek term for discovery. Literally, it's the transition from ignorance to understanding, such as when Oedipus found out about his origins, that he had in fact killed his father or married his mother. We see plenty of examples of this from popular culture as well. Luke Skywalker finding out that Darth Vader is his father, Harry Potter and the Harry Potter books finding out the truth about Snape. There are a number of moments of anagnorisis from every hero's journey. Then there are moments of peripeteia, reversals of circumstances or turning point, moments at which the hero's circumstances drastically change, either for the better or for the worse. We see this in, for example, the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Gilgamesh is able to get his hands on a plant which will grant him immortality, and he has victory in his hands, only to have the plant stolen by a snake at the last moment. This is a moment of peripeteia. Now, this doesn't just mean moments that take a turn for the worse, but also moments that take a turn for the better, such as, I'm going to say this, spoiler alert for the any of the Harry Potter fans out there, the moment in the final Harry Potter book when, I'll give you a moment to pause if you want to do so, when Harry Potter dies only to be resurrected again, and it's through his death that he's able to defeat Voldemort. Then there are moments of catharsis. A catharsis is a cleansing or purging of emotions. This is often part of a hero's rite of passage, and it brings out what's called a liminal event, or an event that changes the hero forever. A great example of this is found in the Epic of Gilgamesh. When the snake steals away the plant, Gilgamesh weeps and cries over the loss, but he undergoes a change. Prior to this, he had been filled with hubris and anger and fear and all of these negative emotions and had been so desperate to evade death. But once he had finally accepted his fate after the snake stole the plant away and he had this moment of catharsis, suddenly Gilgamesh becomes a better person, a better king, a better father, a better hero. And at the end of the story, rather than being afraid of death, He's showing off his city and showing off his accomplishments to the boatman Urshanabi. So that is a great example of catharsis. Now, if we talk about heroes, we also have to take a moment to talk about villains. In his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell identified 3 types of villains based on their motivations. The tyrant hero is the villain whose motivation is most similar to those found in the real world, those who are after power or money. Whereas the shadow is the villain whose motivations are based on the darker, more instinctual aspects of the human psyche, what Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung called the id. In fact, Freud and Jung looked at the human psyche or the human mind as having 3 distinct parts. The id, or instinctual part of the human psyche, the ego, or rational part of the human psyche, and the superego, or moralizing part of the human psyche. Together, these 3, when in balance, would create a balanced individual. But in some individuals, the id is out of control, and people give in to their id. And it's at these moments that people's lives become the darkest. Let's look at an example. Let's say, for example, that you are stuck in traffic, not an uncommon thing in Massachusetts, I've been told. And you're stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic, and you've been stuck there for what feels like forever. What is your id telling you to do? Drive 80 miles an hour in the breakdown lane? Ram into the car in front of you? Drive over everybody with a monster truck? Why don't you do that? Well, because you're overruled by your ego and superego, the rational part of your human psyche that says, well, if that happens, I could get into an accident or I could go to jail, and the moralizing part of your human psyche which says that it's wrong to do these things. So that's just one example of how these 3 aspects of the human psyche work: id, ego, and superego. In the shadow, however, the id has taken over. The third villain type is the antagonist. This is a villain with no clear motivation, who simply acts as an opposing force to the hero or simply as a monster to be defeated. What are some examples of each of these? Well, the tyrant monster, who is after power and money, can most easily be seen in the real world. We see this with dictators and despots of every kind. But we also see these dictators and despots in world mythology. Examples include King Minos, the ruler of Crete, who would enslave people and feed them to the half-bull, half-man Minotaur in his labyrinth. We see this in the Sphinx, who had taken over the city of Thebes until Oedipus was able to successfully solve her riddle. And we see this in King Eurystheus, the evil king who wanted to keep Hercules forever in a state of slavery and make sure that he was not successful in completing his 12 labors. There are plenty of examples of the shadow as well, these manifestations of the id. These include Pandora, who opened Pandora's box. Her id, or her curiosity, led to a number of evils being released in the world. Cupid, or Eros in Greek mythology. In addition to being a god of love, he was also a god of desire, including unnatural desires. Here we see a 5th century BCE Greek pot, and I think we all know what Eros is about to do to that goat right there. Other examples include from Buddhist mythology. You have Mara, who is the evil deity who tried to tempt the Buddha to keep him away from the secret of enlightenment. Or Eris, the Greek goddess of discord, who started the Trojan War because she was not invited to the wedding of Peleus and Thetis. And then there are, of course, plenty of examples of the antagonist as well. These are monsters to be overcome or opposing forces, which include things like the Nemean lion and the Hydra, who were defeated by Hercules, the Medusa defeated by Perseus, or, a great example, Satan, an opposing force to God in Jewish, Christian, and Muslim mythology. Now, whereas heroes and villains are relatively easy to figure out, the trickster is by far one of the most common, but also one of the most enigmatic figures in mythological narratives throughout the world. One of the things that's most unusual about the trickster is that a single mythological figure can be often a hero, a villain, or even both. For example, in Yoruba mythology, there's a story about the trickster god Eshu, where he travels down a road between two farms wearing a hat that is black on one side and red on the other. When Eshu has passed, the farmers get into an argument because one of them saw him wearing a black hat and one saw him wearing a red hat. In one version of the story, Eshu plays the villain because the farmers' argument gets out of control, it spills over to the village, it turns into a fight where many people die, and Eshu looks down at it, cackling, and says, "Aha, I revel in death and destruction." In other versions of the story, he acts as a hero, stopping the fight between the farmers, showing them the hat, and teaching them the lesson that there can be two sides to every story. Simply put, the trickster, as a character, disobeys normal roles and conventional behavior. They're not only ambiguous in terms of their ethical motivations, but they're also ambiguous in terms of what they are. Tricksters can be gods, such as Hermes or Loki, goddesses, such as Athena, spirits, such as the Orisha Eshu, men and heroes, such as Odysseus, women, such as Lilith from Jewish mythology. And very commonly, tricksters are also anthropomorphic animals as well, such as coyote from Native American mythology, or dog and tortoise from Yoruba mythology. Now, what exactly is an anthropomorphic animal, or what is anthropomorphism? Anthropomorphism, very simply, is assigning human characteristics to non-humans. So in the case of coyote has human speech and has faculties of reason. A great way to think of anthropomorphism is look at modern-day cartoon characters, such as Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. These are great examples not only of anthropomorphic animals, but they themselves could also be considered tricksters in their own right. So what are some examples of tricksters? We talked about coyote from Native American mythology. There are many stories, particularly from the Pacific Northwest, of Raven, who is another trickster from Native American mythology. And of course we have the Norse god Loki, who is shown in a number of different formats, especially in the Marvel movies. If you've ever seen the Marvel movies, Loki is a great example of a trickster type of character. So, because the trickster is by its very nature so difficult to define, creating a typology, creating a way to categorize various tricksters is very difficult. So instead of looking at the roles of the trickster, we look at different aspects of the trickster. What are some of the things that the trickster does? And there can be many of these in a single narrative. Now, you will need to know all 12 of these for your Unit 6 assignment, but you will only need to know 2 of these for the exam, and those are the first 2, bricoleur and culture hero. Bricoleur is a French term for a trickster who is also a creator. For example, when Coyote stole a pouch from God's belt and was running away with the pouch and tripped and fell over a tree root, and the contents of the pouch scattered across the sky, creating the stars. Here we have Coyote acting not only as a thief and a trickster, but also as a creator. And of course, we already talked about the idea of the culture hero, someone who provides a people with the things that they need to survive, or helps found a city or a civilization or state. There are also opportunists or trick players, very simply those who take advantage of others and play tricks on them. Mischief makers, who cause trouble just for the hell of it. For example, in one of the myths from this unit from Norse mythology, Loki sneaks into Thor's house in the middle of the night and cuts off all of Thor's wife's hair just because he thought it would be funny. That's a great example of a mischief maker. There's also the amorous adventurer or sex fiend, the trickster who uses tricks in order to get sex. For example, in one of the Coyote stories that we're going to be covering from Unit 6, the story of Coyote Man and Saucy Duckfeather, Coyote Man tricks Saucy Duckfeather into having sex with him. This is a great example of an amorous adventurer. There are also hunger-driven manipulators, those who trick to get food. Tricksters can also be the victim of others' tricks as well. There are plenty of examples of tricksters' tricks rebounding on them and backfiring on them, and they end up being the one in trouble. There are also lazy work avoiders, those who play tricks in order to avoid doing real work. Transgressors, who are trespassers or thieves. Loki sneaking into Thor's house in the middle of the night is another great transgressor example as well. The dog Aja and the tortoise Ajapa from Yoruba mythology sneaking onto farms to steal yams. That's a great example of both hunger-driven manipulators and transgressors. Tricksters can also be shapeshifters as well. In the story of Raven stealing the light, Raven changes himself into a pine needle so that he can impregnate a woman and get inside of a house to steal the light. In the Norse myth of Loki, he changes himself into a fly. There are a number of different examples of tricksters acting as shapeshifters. Tricksters can also be situation inverters. Very often the trickster is physically outmatched by their opponents and has to outwit them in order to succeed. We see this with the fights between Thor and Loki in both mythology and in the Marvel movies. We see this in the story of why we tell stories about Spider from Ga mythology in West Africa, where he's tasked with the task of capturing a swarm of bees, a python, and a live leopard. Under normal circumstances, a spider would not be able to capture a swarm of bees, a python, or a live leopard, and yet Anandu the spider is able to succeed in this because he's able to outwit his opponents and invert the situation. And then we also have tricksters who are messengers or imitator of the gods. Great examples being Hermes, who was a trickster god, but also was the messenger of the gods. Eshu is another example of a messenger of the gods. And also imitators of the gods. You know, in the story of Anandu the spider, he was capturing the swarm of bees, the python, and the live leopard so that he could have stories told about him. Specifically, he wanted the stories that are told about him to be told about God instead. So here he's acting more as an imitator of the gods. So what I want you guys to do for your Unit 6 assignment is I want you guys to take this list and I want you to read one and only one of the following stories. Why we still tell stories about Spider from the Ga people of West Africa. Ajapa, Aja the dog and the yams from the Yoruba people of West Africa. This is one of my absolute favorite stories. It's a lot of fun. The coyote myths from Native American mythology. There are actually 4 coyote myths in your book, but they are all very, very, very short. So assigning them all as a single reading is not out of the ordinary here. The Treasures of the Gods from Norse mythology, which deals with the trickster god Loki from Viking mythology. And Raven Steals the Light from the Haida people of the Pacific Northwest. So for each of these stories, for just one of these stories, I want you to pick one of these myths and construct a 1,000-word essay about the myth, which answers the following question. What aspects of the trickster, from the list I gave you on the previous slide, what aspects of the trickster are described in this myth? Is this trickster a bricoleur, an opportunist, a lazy work avoider, etc.? Like, what aspects of the trickster do you see in this story? The second question I want you to answer, and there's no right or wrong answer here. You can answer it however you want as long as you support it with content from the myth, is the trickster described in this myth a hero or are they a villain? Are they both? Are they neither? And if so, why? You know, what are the motivations of this trickster, and are they acting for the betterment of people and for good things, or are they acting for their own selfish reasons? And even if they're acting for their own selfish reasons, did they end up creating something good for people? So these are the sorts of questions that I want you guys to answer for the Unit 6 assignment. So please complete that by the due date. I wish you the best, and I look forward to hearing from you. If you have any questions about the Unit 6 assignment or about anything else about Unit 6, please post in the forum on Blackboard or the discussion board on Blackboard regarding Unit 6, and I will be happy to get back to you as soon as possible. Bye-bye.